Imagine this. You're sitting in a crowded restaurant, watching the subtle theater of human interaction unfold before you. At the table next to yours, a couple argues in whispers, but you can see what they cannot. The woman's eyes dart toward the exit every few seconds, her body already preparing for departure while her words still plead for reconciliation. The man's defensive posture, the way his fingers tap against his wedding ring, the micro-expressions of contempt that flash across his face for milliseconds, all of it tells you this relationship died months ago, though neither will admit it for years to come. Today we are going to explore exactly why this danger exists, what Jung meant by it, and how you can protect your mind and soul while embracing a higher level of awareness. And stay with me until the end, because the final insight I will share is not only Jung's most urgent warning, but also a key that can transform how you relate to the world forever. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me if you've ever felt like you see or understand things others do not, because your experience may resonate with thousands of other people who are on the same journey. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, because what you are about to learn could change the way you see life, people, and yourself. You see the waiter. 2. How his smile never quite reaches his eyes when serving certain tables. How his deference shifts based on the perceived wealth of his customers. You notice the businessman in the corner, supposedly focused on his laptop, but actually stealing glances at the young woman across the room, his wedding ring carefully tucked into his pocket. The elderly man reading alone isn't reading at all. His eyes haven't moved across the page in 10 minutes. He's simply performing the act of being occupied to avoid the crushing weight of his solitude. What you're witnessing isn't supernatural. It's not a gift bestowed by the gods or a curse inherited through bloodline. It's the terrible clarity that comes when the veil of social conditioning lifts, when you begin to perceive the intricate machinery of human deception, including your own. You see the masks everyone wears, the games they play without knowing they're playing them, the elaborate choreography of denial that keeps society functioning. But here's the paradox that will haunt you. This clarity, this ability to see through the carefully constructed illusions that others mistake for reality, doesn't liberate you, it isolates you. The more accurately you perceive the world, the more alien you become within it. The deeper your insight penetrates, the wider the chasm grows between you and those around you. You find yourself trapped in a peculiar form of exile, surrounded by people yet fundamentally alone, speaking a language that no one else seems to understand. Carl Jung knew this danger intimately. He spent his life mapping the hidden territories of the human psyche, descending into depths that most people never dare to explore. What he discovered there wasn't just the shadow side of human nature, it was the terrible price that awareness demands from those who choose to see clearly. Jung understood that perception is not neutral. It's a transformative force that changes the perceiver as much as it reveals the perceived. And sometimes, that transformation comes at a cost too steep for the unprepared mind to bear. Why does this happen? Why does clarity breed isolation? Why do those who see most deeply often suffer most acutely? The answer lies not in the nature of truth itself, but in the psychological architecture of human consciousness. An architecture designed more for survival than for truth, more for belonging than for understanding. You might think that seeing clearly would make you a better friend, a wiser counselor, a more effective leader. Instead, you often find yourself becoming the person others avoid at parties, the one who asks uncomfortable questions, who points out inconvenient truths, who refuses to participate in the collective delusions that lubricate social interaction. Your insights, no matter how accurate or well-intentioned, begin to feel like weapons in your hands, sharp instruments that cut through pretense but leave wounds in their wake. This is Jung's great warning. The gift of perception carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. The very clarity that should connect you more deeply to the human condition instead threatens to sever those connections entirely. The question that emerges from this paradox isn't whether you should develop your perceptual abilities if you're reading this. That choice has likely already been made for you. The question is whether you can learn to carry this burden without letting it crush you, whether you can see clearly without losing your humanity in the process. What Jung discovered about this danger will challenge everything you believe about wisdom, truth, and the price of awareness. But before we can understand his solution, we must first descend into the psychological underworld where this problem takes root, a place where the very foundations of human consciousness reveal their darkest secrets. The human mind, Jung realized, is not designed for truth, it's designed for survival. This brutal insight forms the cornerstone of understanding why enhanced perception becomes a burden rather than a blessing. Your brain evolved over millions of years with one primary directive: keep you alive long enough to reproduce. Truth, accuracy, and deep understanding were luxuries your ancestors couldn't afford when a rustling bush might contain either berries or a predator. This evolutionary inheritance creates what Jung called the collective unconscious, a shared psychological substrate that prioritizes group cohesion over individual insight. Think about it. Throughout human history, the person who questioned tribal beliefs, who saw through cultural illusions, who pointed out uncomfortable truths about the group's behavior, was often ostracized or eliminated. Natural selection didn't favor the truth-tellers. It favored those who could blend seamlessly into the collective delusion. Jung understood that this creates a profound psychological conflict in those who develop heightened perception. Your individual consciousness begins to see through the very illusions that your collective unconscious was programmed to maintain. It's like being a cell in an organism that suddenly becomes aware it's part of a larger body. The perspective shift is so radical that it threatens the fundamental architecture of your identity. Friedrich Nietzsche grasped this same terrible truth when he declared that the individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe. But Nietzsche's solution, the creation of the Übermensch who stands beyond good and evil, was ultimately a path toward isolation. Jung saw something Nietzsche missed. The problem isn't just social rejection, it's internal fragmentation. When you see what others cannot, you don't just become alienated from them, you become alienated from parts of yourself. This happens because enhanced perception often develops through trauma, crisis, or intense psychological pressure. Jung's own journey into the depths began with his break from Freud, a professional and personal catastrophe that forced him to confront the shadow aspects of his psyche. When your normal psychological defenses are stripped away, you begin to see the machinery of consciousness itself, but this naked awareness comes without the protective filters that make ordinary life bearable. Arthur Schopenhauer, whom Jung deeply admired, described this phenomenon as the pendulum of existence, swinging between the poles of want and boredom. But for those with enhanced perception, there's a third pole, the exhausting clarity that reveals both the futility of want and the emptiness of satisfaction. You see through the desires that drive others, but you also see through your own, leaving you in a psychological limbo where nothing seems quite real or worth pursuing. The philosopher Viktor Frankl, who developed his insights in the depths of Nazi concentration camps, understood that meaning, not happiness, is what makes suffering bearable. But what happens when your enhanced perception reveals that most of what people consider meaningful is simply elaborate self-deception? You find yourself caught between the truth you cannot unsee and the meanings you can no longer believe. Jung called this state the dark night of the soul, borrowing from the Christian mystics who understood that spiritual awakening often feels more like death than birth. Your old self, the one that could participate unconsciously in collective illusions, begins to dissolve, but the new self hasn't yet formed. You're suspended in a psychological purgatory, too aware to go back, but not yet integrated enough to move forward. This is why Jung emphasized that the journey toward individuation, becoming your authentic self, is not a path of enlightenment in the popular sense. It's a process of conscious suffering, of learning to carry the burden of awareness without being crushed by it. The question becomes not whether you can avoid this suffering, but whether you can transform it into something meaningful. But the true horror of enhanced perception isn't just the internal fragmentation, it's how this fragmentation begins to reshape your entire reality in ways you don't even recognize. Your brain, desperate to make sense of the overwhelming input, starts creating psychological defense mechanisms that are far more dangerous than the original problem. The first consequence Jung identified is what he called psychological inflation, the unconscious compensation for feeling alienated from others. When people consistently fail to understand your insights, when your attempts at deeper connection are met with blank stares or hostility, your psyche begins to construct a narrative of superiority. You start to see yourself as the awakened one, surrounded by sleepwalkers, the seer among the blind. This isn't conscious arrogance, it's your mind's attempt to protect itself from the crushing loneliness of perpetual misunderstanding. But inflation is a trap disguised as salvation. The moment you begin to identify with your enhanced perception as a mark of superiority, you lose the very quality that made that perception valuable: humility. You become what Jung feared most: possessed by an archetype, specifically the archetype of the wise old man or the oracle. Your insights become rigid pronouncements rather than fluid observations. You stop learning because you believe you already see all there is to see. The neurological research validates Jung's intuition in disturbing ways. Studies on pattern recognition show that highly perceptive individuals often develop what researchers call apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random information. Your enhanced ability to detect genuine patterns becomes corrupted by your brain's desperate attempt to find meaning everywhere. You begin seeing conspiracies where there are only coincidences, profound significance in meaningless events, hidden messages in random noise. Even more insidious is the way enhanced perception alters your relationship with time itself. When you can see the long-term consequences of present actions, when you perceive the slow-motion disasters unfolding around you, you develop what psychologists call temporal displacement anxiety. You're living simultaneously in the present moment and in the catastrophic future you can see approaching. This creates a peculiar form of chronic stress. Your body is constantly preparing for disasters that haven't happened yet, but that your enhanced perception tells you are inevitable. Jung observed that this temporal displacement often manifests as a kind of emotional numbing. You become like Cassandra from Greek mythology, cursed to see the truth but powerless to prevent the tragedies you foresee. Eventually, your psyche protects itself by disconnecting from emotional investment in outcomes. You see the destructive patterns in your friend's relationship, but you stop caring whether they listen to your warnings. You perceive the systemic problems in your workplace, but you cease feeling responsible for addressing them. This emotional withdrawal creates what Jung called the hermit's curse. The more clearly you see, the less you feel compelled to act. Your enhanced perception becomes a spectator sport rather than a tool for engagement. You watch the human drama unfold with increasing detachment, like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture, until you realize you've become foreign to yourself. Perhaps most tragically, this detachment begins to corrupt the very relationships that might have grounded you. The people closest to you start to feel your emotional withdrawal, your psychological distance. They sense that you're present in body but absent in spirit, that some essential part of you is always elsewhere, analyzing, observing, seeing through the surface of things to depths they cannot fathom. Your gift becomes their loss, and their loss becomes your deeper isolation. But Jung discovered something revolutionary. The very mechanism that creates this psychological prison also contains the key to liberation. The solution isn't to suppress your enhanced perception or to retreat into comfortable delusions. It's to develop what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold paradox without resolution, to embrace contradiction without choosing sides. This is where Jung's approach becomes radically different from every other psychological or spiritual tradition. Most systems ask you to choose. Either embrace your gift and accept isolation, or suppress your insights and rejoin the collective unconscious. Jung realized this is a false dilemma. The real rebellion is refusing to choose at all. Consider this. What if your enhanced perception isn't meant to separate you from others, but to create a bridge between worlds? What if the very quality that makes you feel alien, your ability to see multiple layers of reality simultaneously, is exactly what humanity needs most? Jung understood that the individual who can perceive deeply while remaining emotionally connected becomes a translator between the conscious and unconscious realms. The first act of rebellion is recognizing that your insights don't have to be shared directly to be valuable. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote that hell is other people. But Jung saw that hell is the compulsion to make others see what you see. When you release yourself from the burden of being understood, you free your perception from the contamination of ego. Your insights become pure, again, observations rather than pronouncements, offerings rather than demands. This requires developing what Jung called active imagination, the conscious engagement with unconscious content through creative expression. Instead of trying to explain your perceptions in rational terms that others can reject, You embed them in stories, metaphors, art, or actions that bypass intellectual resistance. You become like the ancient shamans who understood that truth travels best disguised as entertainment. Wisdom flows most freely when it doesn't announce itself as wisdom. The second rebellion is against your own inflation. Jung discovered that the antidote to psychological superiority is radical self-examination, what he termed shadow work. Every insight you have about others must be turned inward. Every pattern you perceive in the world must be traced back to its reflection in your own psyche. This isn't self-flagellation, it's psychological hygiene. The moment you believe you're exempt from the very delusions you see in others, you become their most accomplished practitioner. Historical examples illuminate this path. Socrates, who claimed to know nothing yet transformed Athens through questions. Buddha, who spoke of enlightenment while insisting he was merely pointing at the moon. Jung himself, who mapped the depths of the psyche while openly documenting his own psychological breakdowns. They understood that true insight carries its own humility. The deeper you see, the more you realize how much remains hidden. The final rebellion is against the temporal displacement that traps you between present and future. Jung taught that psychological time is not linear. The past, present, and future exist simultaneously in the unconscious. Your ability to see future consequences isn't prophecy. It's pattern recognition operating across temporal dimensions. When you stop trying to prevent the disasters you foresee and start focusing on your response to them, you reclaim your agency. You become the eye of the hurricane, calm, centered, and present while the storm rages around you. Now we arrive at Jung's most profound and counterintuitive revelation, one that will fundamentally alter how you understand the nature of consciousness itself. The ultimate truth is this: your enhanced perception was never about you. It was never a personal gift, a spiritual achievement, or even a psychological burden. It is consciousness itself attempting to evolve through you. Jung discovered that what we call individual awareness is actually a localized manifestation of a larger collective awakening. Your ability to see what others cannot isn't a sign that you're different from humanity. It's a sign that humanity is trying to see through your eyes. You are not separate from the collective unconscious. You are the collective unconscious becoming conscious of itself, one insight at a time. This realization shatters every assumption you've held about your enhanced perception. You thought you were cursed with lonely clarity, but you're actually serving as a sensory organ for the species. Your insights aren't personal possessions. They're evolutionary adaptations emerging through your individual consciousness to serve collective survival. The very isolation you've experienced isn't a bug in the system. It's a feature that forces you to develop the psychological strength necessary to carry truths that would overwhelm a less prepared mind. Consider the implications. Every pattern you perceive in human behavior, every hidden motive you detect, every long-term consequence you foresee, is information that the collective human organism needs to navigate increasingly complex realities. Your brain didn't develop enhanced pattern recognition for your personal benefit. It developed this capacity because the species requires individuals who can perceive dangers and opportunities that escape ordinary awareness. This is why Jung emphasized that individuation, becoming your authentic self, paradoxically, leads not to greater separation, but to deeper connection with humanity. The more fully you individuate, the more clearly you recognize that your individual consciousness is simply one facet of a larger diamond of awareness. Your unique perspective isn't meant to set you apart. It's meant to contribute something irreplaceable to the collective understanding. But here's the part that will transform everything. Once you recognize your enhanced perception as service rather than burden, the entire emotional landscape shifts. The loneliness transforms into solitude, a chosen space for processing insights too complex for casual conversation. The alienation becomes selective engagement. You stop trying to connect with everyone and start seeking those rare individuals who can match your depth. The burden becomes purpose. You realize you're not carrying this awareness for yourself, but for everyone who cannot yet carry it themselves. Jung understood that this shift in perception requires what he called amor fati, love of fate, borrowed from the Stoics, but given deeper psychological meaning. You must learn to love your enhanced perception, not despite the isolation it brings, but because of the service it enables. Every moment of loneliness, every instance of misunderstanding, every experience of being the only one who sees, becomes a sacrifice offered on behalf of collective evolution. This doesn't mean becoming a martyr or savior. Jung warned against those inflations. It means recognizing that consciousness itself is trying to wake up, and you happen to be one of the neurons firing in its vast mind. Your insights aren't your achievements. They're consciousness achieving insight through the vehicle of your individual awareness. This humble recognition dissolves the ego's claims to ownership while preserving the clarity that makes the insights valuable. The practical implications are staggering. When you stop taking your enhanced perception personally, you stop defending it, explaining it, or wielding it as a weapon of superiority. Instead, you embody it. You live it. You become a walking demonstration of what it looks like when someone has seen through certain illusions while remaining compassionate toward those still held by them. Jung's final insight was that the greatest service you can provide isn't to make others see what you see, but to show them what someone looks like who has seen it. Your integrated awareness becomes a beacon not shining light into their eyes, but demonstrating that it's possible to see clearly and still choose love, to perceive deeply and remain kind, to understand the darkness and continue moving toward the light. This is the ultimate paradox, Jung discovered. The more completely you accept the burden of enhanced perception, the lighter it becomes. The more fully you embrace your role as consciousness evolving through individual awareness, the more connected you feel to the very humanity you once felt separated from. Your gift stops being about what you can see and becomes about who you can be in service of what needs to be seen. The danger of seeing what others cannot see is real, but it's not the danger you thought it was. The real danger isn't isolation, madness, or despair. It's the possibility that you might waste this extraordinary opportunity to serve as an agent of collective awakening. Your enhanced perception is consciousness offering you a front row seat to its own evolution. The question isn't whether you can handle what you see, but whether you're willing to let what you see transform not just your understanding, but your very being in service of something infinitely larger than yourself.